Hey, Steve Reed here. Welcome to One Climbs. I wanted to show you something kind of interesting I came across in the scriptures. I hadn't seen this connection made before, but over the past several years, I've been thinking a lot about how Mormon appears to use a lot of the symbolism from Nephi's vision in his writings, especially around the Book of Alma. We see a lot of this. And as much as I read the Book of Mormon over and over again, I continually find more and more these kind of interesting connections. And this could be done fairly easily just by looking out for word links where you see the same phrase appearing again and again. It's very helpful to look back through the scriptures and see, well, where else does this phrase appear? And see if there's potential connections. In this case, what we're actually seeing is a fulfillment of a prophecy, in a sense, made by Nephi. Now, what's kind of cool, and this has always been one of my favorite things about the Book of Mormon. There's lots of favorite things, but I love the fact that we get to see Lehi having this vision of the tree of life, and then seemingly just days later, Nephi wants to see the same vision. So he wants to see the tree. He's shown the tree and he's shown all these other components of the vision, but the contexts are so different. And I think that reveals to us this lesson about how to view symbolic things in scripture, such as dreams and visions, revelations, and I think really any kind of symbolism you see in scripture, that it can be looked at in various ways. Now, what's really interesting is Lehi, when he has the vision, it's he's going through, he's participating in it. He's partaking of the fruit of the tree. He's gone through the mists of darkness and everything, and he's gone through the path, and now he wants to invite his family to come. And so it's all about the salvation of his family, himself and his family. Now, when Nephi experiences a similar vision, with all the similar elements, he's more so observing and he's learning about what these things mean. And then he sees the vision expand into basically the history of his people and his nation. And so the elements of this vision go from being very personal, tied to a family, to being projected onto the historical timeline of the people. And I think that's really fascinating because it allows us to look at these things in different ways. We can look at, you go to the allegory of the olive tree. Now, typically we look at that as representing the house of Israel and being history of the house of Israel. But I think we can also take it another direction and think, well, and so some of the ways I look at it are, what if that tree is me and the Lord of the vineyard is trying to graft things into my life and prune things out of my life? And sometimes you get a bunch of crap or dung thrown at your feet. And do you let it nourish you or do you resist it, right? Are we bringing forth wild fruit or tame fruit? So you could look at it as personal. Another way I look at that is I think of the tree, the mother tree. It's called the mother tree 4 times, or the word mother is used at least. And I started thinking, okay, well, what if I think about that tree as my wife and the Lord of the vineyard as myself? And what am I doing to nurture my wife and to help her prosper and grow? Because there's a connection between the tree and feminine, and there's been a lot said about that by various people. And so there's lots of really interesting, fun, creative ways that we can play with these revelations. And when I say play, I don't mean in like a casual sense, but I really believe personally, because I'm a creative person and I see the creativity in this. They're painting pictures, there's puns involved, there's kind of a playfulness to it that I don't think we really address a lot, talk about a lot, or really know how to use. But I'm kind of coming to the scriptures as a creative person, not as an intellectual, not as a scholar. I have a very deep, long history in the creative world. It's what I do for a living. And so I kind of come to the scriptures with that mindset. That's how I approach them. And I'm not saying that's the only way to approach them. It's one way, right? One of many, but it shouldn't be excluded. We should take the intellectual approach. We should take the creative approach. These are kind of like two sides of the coin in a way. But I really think we are lacking in this area in our study of the scriptures as a whole. And I think there's a lot more that could be done there. So we've got scripture notes open right here. And I actually was reading in Alma 44 when this caught my eye. And what it did is it brought me back to 1 Nephi chapter 12. So I want to start here first and lay the foundation a little bit. So in the vision, Nephi is seeing the history of his people, and it's meshing with this vision of the tree of life. He's learned some of these symbols, and he's learned the landscape of this vision, and now he's starting to see connections being made. So he sees multitudes of the earth gathered together. It's a combination of his seed and the seed of his brethren, these two groups, and they're gathered together to battle. And the angel speaks to him saying, "Behold the fountain of filthy water." And so I'd always connected the fountain of filthy water with the great and spacious building. I was like, maybe the fountain of filthy water is just the excrement and the waste flowing out of this building into the river, kind of polluting it. And we know there's people drowning in the river as well. So this is the same river that Nephi's father saw, and the depths are the depths of hell. So it's these elements here: the filthy water, the river, and the depths. That's what caught my attention. And I'll come back to that here in a little bit. But you go to Alma 2. So I want to go here first because this is the kind of the war between Alma and Amlicites. And they prepare to meet them. They arm themselves and they're going to war, and they begin to slay the Amlicites. So we're seeing, in this case, this is kind of fulfilled many times throughout Nephi history, but we're seeing this happen. But watch what happens down here. So they begin to slay them. There's a lot of back and forth. But look at this. They've cleared the ground, and they're throwing the bodies of the Lamanites who've been slain into the waters of Sidon. Now, when corpses are in water, like if out in nature, there's a dead deer in a small pond, that dead body will poison the water, right? You can poison a well by throwing a dead animal in there and whatnot. That would certainly create filthy water. And so keep that in mind. We have war and then bodies being thrown into the water. And I have some ideas on this. So this is it. We see the same thing happening with Captain Moroni and Zarahemna. Zarahemna, they've already kind of cornered Zarahemna. Then there's the back and forth where he gets scalped, and then they start slaughtering them again because they won't surrender and go in peace. And this is the verse that really caught my attention and drew me over to this one here. So it says, "It came to pass, the number of dead was not numbered because of the greatness of the number." A lot of them. There were a lot of death. Very sad. So they cast the dead into the waters of Sidon. Sidon's a river. And they're buried in the depths of the sea. So we have filthy water, a river, and depths. Same thing right here. And hopefully they cast them into the river. I think this was likely south of Zarahemla. And so hopefully the river was flowing south. I believe it was. I think there's some contention on that, but it would make sense that the river would flow south. Otherwise, it would flow north up into Zarahemla and poison the waters up there. So hopefully it's flowing south into Lamanite territory at this point, rather than Nephite territory. That would make sense. Also, why they would cast the dead into the waters. I don't think they were trying to poison the Lamanites, but they certainly weren't wanting all the dead bodies coming up there. But it makes me wonder, too, if perhaps the Nephites were doing this. Now, here it was kind of practical. They were throwing the bodies into the river so that they might have room to cross. I don't know if they were using the bodies as kind of stepping stones or whatever, but a little morbid there. also a little morbid, casting the dead into the waters. But I wonder if this was, to a degree, the people fulfilling the prophecy of Nephi here, right? Certainly Mormon is adding little clues that kind of connect these ideas together. But again, we see Mormon doing this quite a bit. There is a post I've written on One Climbs about Mormon and using the Tree of Life vision as a framework for telling Alma's story. And there may be an upcoming episode of another show I was on where I went into great depth on this, way more depth than I do in my article. And so I'm going to let that thing come out and go from there. I'm not really going to get into the nitty gritty on it. But essentially, what we seem to see over and over again is Mormon, as he's abridging the history of the people of Nephi, he's looking at it in retrospect. And I've heard before that really prophecy can only be understood in hindsight after it's already transpired. And so, like, well, what's the value of prophecy then? Well, we continually get ourselves into situations and things happen. And when we look back at the prophecies and see that they have been fulfilled, we get a much more detailed understanding of how God is really in control and how he foresaw things and he warned us. And so I think when we see those things happen, we're a little bit more cognizant, retrospect about prophecies happening in our time. Well, okay, we need to prepare ourselves and heed the warnings so that we don't find ourselves on the wrong side of that prophecy. And so I think that's one of the ways we can learn. And having access to the scriptures in our days, it's all about hindsight. So we're really just looking back in time and trying to learn from the past so that we can make better decisions in the future. Now, one of the things you'll see, and you can probably dive a little bit deeper, hopefully not into the depths, but dive a little deeper on this idea and look for these other word links between that are being made between Nephi's vision and the events unfolding in the Book of Mormon, even up into our modern day in many respects. So the one other thing you can look at too, and this is kind of fun, this idea of the mists of darkness, right? And the mists of darkness, they do two things. They blind the eyes. The other phrase you'll see is minds. They'll blind the minds. Nephi uses it with his brothers, and then there's at least I think one other place in the Book of Mormon where it talks about blind minds, hardened hearts, blind eyes, hardened hearts. But you'll see this this blindness in the hearts and the hardening of the hearts. You'll see this cluster, these things repeated several times in the Book of Mormon. And so it's worth looking into and seeing those links and how they relate to this vision and how they're being connected. And it's a really fascinating exercise to do because I think it takes you much deeper into the text. And what I see, at least, as Mormon is abridging this, I see someone who is writing the history of his people, but he's not just abridging. He's inserting his own prophetic commentary as well. He's saying things without saying them. He's linking different prophecies together. And he's doing a lot more than just abridging history. He's trying to, I think in his own way, prove that these prophecies are being fulfilled. And he's doing it in a very creative way. It's subtle, but it's obvious enough that once you start to see it, you can go, okay, I see what you're doing here. And you can then use that tool that Mormon's prepared to kind of take you deeper into the text and see it with maybe different eyes than you've seen it in the past. It's really interesting to see how these different word links appear in the scriptures and how they can draw us deeper into their meaning. The Book of Mormon is such a richly complex record. We're not just listening to just this long narrative story. There's all these subtle little links back to these different things that we can connect. So it's pretty cool. So anyway, hopefully you got something from that insight today. I would try to observe in the scriptures and see what other things that you can potentially find, and feel free to share any additional ideas or things in the comments. I certainly don't catch everything. And again, this is just an observation. So I'm interested to see what other people find in this respect. I think it's an interesting way of studying. Hopefully you found that helpful to you as you study the scriptures on your own. Hey, thanks for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you again on One Climbs.